happy to introduce the first speaker, Salmerón. He is a professor at the Maths department at the University of Almeria in Spain. I've known him for 15 years or so, and we have been playing around with probabilistic AI for all that time. So he is really clever and very well respected, so we're happy to have him here. Welcome here.
Thank you very much, Helge, and thank you to all the organizers. Tariq and Terry and Ule, so thank you very much for giving me the chance to be in this fantastic university. I must say that it's quite imposing to be in front of such an audience. I know you're very qualified students, and this is a university with a great tradition, fantastic history, and as we have seen in the previous video in the presentation, with a long record of achievements. I come from the probably furthest point in Europe, southern point in Europe, but we know very well what NTNU means for the academic tradition in Europe. Actually, we have agreements for exchanging Erasmus students, and most of my students in maths, they come here when it comes to go outside. So, and all of them return. When they return to Almeria, they are absolutely satisfied, and they have a feeling that they have really had a nice experience, a life experience, but also an academic experience. So, for all of you that study here, I think you must be very happy, and for the rest of the audience that is coming here, I suggest that you take the opportunity to enjoy these days, and because, as I said before, you are really in the place to be. But having said that, I think it's difficult to put up with whatever expectation you may have, especially in an opinion like this. But I'll try to do my best, and what I will speak about is probabilistic models, or probabilistic modeling, so it will be kind of an introduction to the really interesting thing. So I will be, as a boring person, I will be in charge of telling boring things, and then you will have fun later with Andres and Thomas in the tutorials and the rest of the speakers tomorrow and the remaining days. But someone had to catch the bullet, how do you say that? And I just joking. So, again, thank you very much, and let's start with put hands on. And when you're preparing a class, a lecture, you'll find out many of you will become lecturers or will eventually have to teach or give a presentation in conferences. But especially when you prepare a lecture for your students, you think about what should the first slide be. Never like this kind of slides. So all of you know what is the title of the talk, or who is going to teach. This is the most important one, the first slide. So taking into account that we are in Norway, and now the world chess champion is a Norwegian, Magnus Carlsen, I decided to start like this. Because when AlphaZero managed to beat Stockfish, that so far was the best computer chess program. By the way, Stockfish is a Norwegian program as well. Then Peter Hansen, this guy in the photo, which is a grandmaster, chess grandmaster. And I know him because by chance, for some years he played in the local team in my city in Almeria. We were European runner-ups, but most of the players were from abroad. And he was one of the players, and it was funny to see him, or to read what he said after AlphaZero managed to win against Scottish. And he said, I always wondered how it would be if a superior species landed on Earth and showed us how to play chess. And now I know it. So that was he said, and he's a very good player. He's also one of the team members that is helping Magnus Carlsen. But the question is that, yes, AlphaZero managed to perform extremely well and to play chess as never has played before in history. No human, no computer. You know that now humans, we are not as good as playing chess as we used to be. I remember, I'm getting old, So I remember the first time I took an artificial intelligence course, it was back in 1989. It was at the University of Granada in Spain. So the professor was saying, one proof that computers cannot really think, or is that our being really intelligent, is that they cannot be that in chess. That's it. But now any cell phone is able to beat the world champion. So what do we say now? What we say now is that actually chess is not really an intelligence game. So, I think we are checking out saying we have to an example to say that I'm more intelligent than a computer. Anyway, the important question is what when it comes to taking probabilistic models into account is what can we learn about AlphaZero's achievement in chess? Because this guy said that now I know how they play chess, these aliens play chess, or these algorithms play chess, but can we learn from that? Well, maybe we can actually. Professional players are training now with computers and they play in a different way. But however, the question is, can we interpret what AlphaZero did to be so good at chess? That's a question. Probably we can. Probably we can, but it's not, as far as I know, there's not such a clear way of understanding the model and the reasoning path the computer followed in order to find strategies that were superior to state-of-the-art strategies for playing chess. And then, as I told you, I chose chess because it was the paradigm of artificial intelligence back in the Middle Ages when I started artificial intelligence. And now I still think that it's, even though that's very good, we also would, it would also be quite interesting if we had the chance to learn how the computers has learned to do some tasks that we didn't know how to do before. And what I tried to show during this introduction lecture is that probabilistic model are perhaps an appropriate choice if we want to learn something from data. Not only something that computers can use or algorithms can use, but also something that humans can interpret. So I will start giving some motivating example of current applications of probabilistic models. And the first one that I wanted to show is a Spanish one. Actually, this is a snapshot of one application developed by a company with headquarters in Madrid. It's called Holosip, and was founded by maybe two professors that you may know if you have already worked on probabilistic models. They are Concha Abierta and Pedro Larrañaga from the Technical University of Madrid. But the main, they share the major. Sorry, not to say that. The main share owner is a professional football player, Esteban Granero, formerly in Real Madrid, and now is playing in Espanyol in Barcelona. And he decided to do somehow. He was a former student of Pedro Larrañaga in the Basque Country. This Granero, actually, the football player, studied computer science. And he was interested in artificial intelligence. He had the feeling that there was a possibility of using that for managing football clubs. So when Pedro Larrañaga went to Madrid, they get in touch again and started this project. So now that the Spanish Professional League has reached an agreement with this company, they are using that for assisting coaches in many things. I wanted to point out this predictive medicine. Now they know what is. They have a personalized profile for each of the players, and according to what they are behaving, their medical tests, and how they are behaving in games and in trainings, they can compute what is the probability that some player will be injured in some part of his body. And so that they can decide when to stop, and maybe they should have a rest for a couple of days or use a different training or whatever. But these softwares have some other features. they are using now for deciding how to get new players, and this is somehow replacing human. I don't know the word in English, but this all clubs have people that are watching games and analyzing players, so that we could maybe get the scouts. Yes, thank you. And now they are partly replacing that. We know this from baseball, so it was previously using. I think baseball was the first example where we use this kind of database decision making in terms of what players get for the next season. So what they say now is I need a player that is very good in the middle pitch or whatever set, or that is fast and that is able to defend as well. And then the program explores the market and says these are the options that we have. This player is available. This one has this. Don't know how many million euros that you have to pay to the club if you want to get it. So you can make a decision taking into account what is the cost of the player and what is his his real skills according to your needs. But of course, we have more examples. Saying I put this self-driving cars. Then I just stole this photo. So, oh, you are recording. Okay. I stole this photo from, actually not from Google, so from someone else that stole it from Google. So if I steal a clip, I just wanted to put a car with some radar on top of it, and so it's no. I don't even know what car it is, so there's no publicity about that. But there's something that there's also some controversy now about self-driving cars. Actually, I remember a funny video on a TV program. Well, funny because it didn't have bad consequences for humans. But it was a self-driving car, I won't say the brand, but that was unable to really find out the borders of the road, so it was going from one place to another until it crashed against the mountain. Anyway, think about that situation in which self-driving cars are performing really well. So the fact that we find an example where it makes a mistake doesn't mean that it doesn't work. But in case that there's something going wrong, can we analyze afterwards what has really been the problem? Because if it has consequences regarding human lives or injuries or the car has destroyed something with an economic value, then you could be sued, or the company that uses the car, that manufactures the car, could be sued, and then the judge will try to analyze who's to blame. And if the model that is making decisions is not, say, likely to, or we cannot analyze it in order to know what went wrong, then we could have a problem. In that sense, that would be nice to have some models that are able to explain themselves. Somehow we could see how the model is working and in some way analyze what went wrong. Of course, we have examples of probabilistic modeling in politics, and I think that the most outstanding example was Barack Obama's campaign in 2012, where he used he analyzed data and used probabilistic models to decide how to design a more or less personalized campaign. And I think from then on it has been actually used. I just wanted to put the example of Spain, where after that, while Spain wanted to be really ahead of or quite innovative in that sense, and then allowed political parties to have full access to citizens' data. And for some years, in order so that the political parties could make personalized campaigns, very individualized campaigns. Luckily, it has been forbidden again, so political parties in Spain can no longer have access to our data, but they already have, so they would have it until I die, I think. But I must say that I'm quite disappointed because I didn't receive any message from any political party, so they don't find my vote interesting anymore. But And finally, one more example. This is something that we've been working for, but there are many other groups working. It's environmental sciences or environmental application. This is turning quite important because we want to know what is happening because things are happening very fast now in what concerns to environments. And one important thing, this map here corresponds to the place where I live, actually, the University of Almeria. Is here. And this is Sierra Nevada, for instance, for you probably know, and Granada is right here. So we come from this area, which is a very dry area in Spain. And in general, in Andalusia, this is the south part of Spain. There's a lot of pressure from tourism, which means construction in areas that are very close to protected areas, and so there's a potential risk in changes in land use, and also we have a forest fire threat. So it's quite important to know how is the land use progressing, especially, as I said, close to protected areas. So we can use probabilistic models to measure the evolution of the land use and take into account some variables to predict what is going to be in the next future. So we think about what we had in all the previous examples is that all of them operate in environments where large amounts of data were available, or potentially available. You think, for instance, about the car. The car is continuously getting new data from sensors, and you could also get data from connected from other cars or from weather station, traffic information, whatsoever. You have a lot of sources of data that you can handle. However, regardless of the amount of data that you have, it will never cover all the possible scenarios. That's a key point, maybe. Then all the applications that I showed use a probabilistic model that is left from the available data. And all of them use inference algorithms. When I mean inference algorithms, I'm talking about algorithms that allow to make decisions or know what is going to happen, given that we have some inputs. So that we can carry out predictions about the model or the scenario that we are handling. But we can also analyze the structure of the problem. So we can try to know what are the dependencies or the interactions between the different entities that play any role in our application. What do probabilistic models offer? The first thing is that they have a well-founded, well-theoretically founded way of quantifying uncertainty. What do I mean by uncertainty? Uncertainty, this is connected with the fact that data is not covering all the possible scenarios that can happen, because maybe they are even infinite. Okay. So you need a way to handle uncertainty, and probabilistic models are maybe one way to do that, a good way to do that. Also, they offer a more or less natural way of handling missing data. And you might say, okay, missing data, yeah, we have so much or so many data. Well, I don't know. This talks about how to handle data. Is it singular, is it plural, is it countable, is it uncountable? But I always refer to PhD comics where they say, if you only have one data, then grammar is not your problem. That's it. Then, even though we have a huge amounts of data, there can always be missing data. For instance, when we are speaking of a variable that cannot be observed, regardless of how much data we have, we can observe it. And more importantly, that's why I highlighted it. Probabilistic models offer interpretability, so we know how to read them. And we will actually, in the particular class of probabilistic models that we will use, which are probabilistic graphical models, we will show how we can read those models. So it's like a language that humans can interpret. We will particularize, as I said, to the class of probabilistic models that are called probabilistic graphical models. We will, in a few slides, we will see the formal definition of a probabilistic graphical model. But basically, it's a probabilistic model that factorizes in some given way. Because in addition to what we say that we need from probabilistic models, we will also put two more restrictions or requirements. that would be nice if we had the ability to operate in high-dimensional spaces. So, in other words, if we are able to handle many variables at the same time, and also support efficient inference and learning for those models. And we'll see how, or well, not we, you will see along these lectures and tutorials this week that it's possible to do that. To do learning and inference efficiently. And also, I will try to show that inference and learning are actually connected problems from what we will call the Bayesian approach. What do PGS, probabilistic graphical models, offer? They offer structure and specification of high-dimensional distributions, so that they can be specified instead of smaller models that are easier to handle. And there are efficient inference and learning algorithms that take advantage of that factorization. And also, they are called graphical because that factorization can be visually represented, so that just having a glimpse at having a quick look at the representation, we can get some knowledge about what's happening. And also, I wanted to show this probabilistic modeling cycle that I took from, I wanted to mention David Bly because it's kind of the guy to follow in probabilistic models. There will be references to his group's work. And that's what he calls the boxes loop, but it's actually basically the scientific approach to, or the scientific way of working. So that we have, we build models, and then we using data, we actually learn, or we choose a model, and then using data, we particularize that model to the data that we have, and then using that particularized model, then we can make decisions or applications in different areas. But of course, we can criticize the models, we can carry out tests in order to know whether the model is accurate or not, and revise the model according to the outcome of those tests. Then we could build the model again, choose a different model, or whatever. And PGMs actually play an important role here because most of the models or typical models that are included in these box, mixture models, time series, regressive models, factor models, can be represented easily as probabilistic graphical models. But of course, we will also speak about how inference can be carried out and how they are learned from data. By the way, please feel free to. Oh, yes, that was what I was going to say.
Will these slides available after the lecture?
Sorry?
Will these slides available after the lecture?
Yes. Yes. Well, I think they have them, so we will make them available. So I was going to say that. Please feel free to interrupt me in any moment. So I will go before going back to the formal definition of Bayesian network. I would like to take a look at how can we learn a probabilistic model from data. And we have mainly two ways of doing that. There are other ways to do that, but mainly if you look at current work, especially current work in artificial intelligence, then everybody is following, let's say, a likelihood-based approach, or they are following a Bayesian approach. There are other ways of estimating parameters of a probabilistic model, like moment matching method, or an estimator. But as I said, these are the fundamental ways of doing that. So let's start with what is called the frequentist approach. I don't know if any of you come from maths or statistics. Is anyone a graduate in statistics? Or so probably great. Probably you know that for some years, at least in Spain, it happened. There was kind of a war between Bayesians and non-Bayesian people, and during that war, I was on the Bayesian side in Spain. I don't know if it was a good idea because most of the professors were frequentists, and But I have nothing against frequencies. I mean, it's no, no. I mean, it's because if I turn back to the 90s, then Bayesians were very careful not to ever use anything coming from frequencies, from the frequencies rule. And the frequencies, people also were very careful not to use anything that sounded like Bayesian. So it was a nonsense. So, I figured I will show the Bayesian approach in 2 slides. I find it quite natural, so that's why I usually. But also, the frequencies approach relies on a very natural way of doing things, as we'll see. So a probabilistic model from the frequencies point of view is just what we have on the slide. One random variable x, it could be more than one, so it could be what is called a random vector. And then we have the probability density function, or probability mass function, if the variable is discrete, associated with x. By the way, you will hear me say probability distribution many times. I know it is incorrect for the statistician people, but in artificial intelligence, I know you usually say probability distribution when it can be either discrete, continuous, or both means. Okay, so instead of saying density slash mass, or just say distribution, assuming that I'm really referring to the density or to the probability mass function. So we have this function that actually encodes all the probabilistic information about the variable, and then we know that probability distribution except a parameter or a set of parameters. And the key thing here is that in the frequencies approach, the parameter is a fixed value. What is happening is that we don't know, what that value is, but it is a fixed value, so it's not a random variable. So we denote that fact using this convention. We have this or this. I think in most of the slides, depending on who I stole them from, I will use this notation. But you can also find this notation indicating that you know the probability density f except the value of the parameter p. So for a sample of n random variables, what we have is the key tool here is the likelihood function. That is what we have on slide L. That is nothing but the joint density or mass function of the sample, but regarded as a function of the unknown parameter. So I'll put here a few examples of likelihood functions. Assume we have a sample of size 1, very appropriate for an example, but you will never have this problem in practice, handling a sample of size 1. Coming from a binomial distribution with parameters 50 and unknown success probability p, then the likelihood function would be something something like what is on the screen. Well, this, for instance, is the likelihood function for parameter p. For parameter p, when the sample was equal to 5. It's a binomial, so it could be an integer number from 0 to 50. Looks like this. This when the data is equal to 10, 25, and 35. So how is the likelihood function used to estimate the parameters? We just have to maximize it. That is, find the value of the parameters that makes the likelihood that maximizes the likelihood function. So this likelihood approach is somehow assuming that what you have observed is the most likely to be observed. So under that assumption, we would just have to compute the derivative of the likelihood function, make it equal to 0, and then find the value of theta according to that. Or p in this case according to that. So something like this, and then go down and find what is the value of it. Then my students back in Spain would be saying, well, they say, teacher, well, actually, they try to formulate in kindergarten. So I say, you like little teacher or dear teacher? my name is Antonio, so call me Antonio. So, and they would say, that is not a straight line, are you sure that's... Okay. So, never mind, so I was just doing it. So that's a natural, also a natural way. Perhaps a clear decision comes from the fact that likelihood or the likelihood-based approaches somehow assume, okay, I will find the value of the parameters, but assuming that what I have observed is the most likely to be observed in some sense. Well, what about the Bayesian approach? So the Bayesian approach is based on assuming that parameters can be dealt with as if they were random variables. We know they are not random variables, but from the point of view of the modeling, of the modeler or the practitioner, they could be random variables because we don't know what value they are taking in one precise moment. So this allows us to include one very interesting, at least I find it interesting, is that we can include prior information. So we can have information about the unknown parameters previously to having the data. And then that information can be updated once we have analyzed the sum. And how is this done? Well, this is just done by applying Bayes' rule. That's what's called Bayesian approach. Even though Thomas Bayes didn't know, he wasn't thinking about this when he formulated the Bayes' rule. Well, actually, he didn't even formulate it. But it's called a Bayesian approach. And the elements of a probabilistic model when we are in the Bayesian setting would be this prior distribution, I or theta, that is a distribution on the unknown parameters. Then we have the joint distribution of the data and the parameters, and that is computed actually using the distribution of the data times the prior distribution, and what is called the marginal likelihood of the data, that is computed by integrating out the parameters from the joint. And finally, the posterior distribution on the parameters, that is computed by Bayes' rule. So what you have here is actually Bayes' rule. And look, that instead of having a precise value for the parameter, what we obtain in the Bayesian setting is a full distribution on the parameter or on the parameter after observing the data. So now we can do many things using that distribution. We could try to get a point estimation as well, but we can do a lot more things. Well, the kind of things that you can do with a probability distribution, you cannot play football or anything like that, but you can do many things. You can even build a hypothesis, test, even compute confidence interval, that is called Cradle sets or Cradle regions in the Bayesian setting and things like that. And more importantly, you can evaluate the uncertainty in your prediction quite naturally because you have the distribution on the parameters. So, I will just put an example so that we understand how. Remember that in the frequentist approach, the algorithm was to just maximize the likelihood function by computing the derivative in the natural way. No? Here the approach is different. Assume we have a sample of size n coming from a binomial distribution or a Bernoulli distribution actually, with a known success rate p. And as we are in the Bayesian setting, we consider p to be a random variable and assume it has a higher density that is uniform in the interval 0, 1. Then this is the joint distribution of data and parameters would be the product of these two. That can be easily computed because it's just the joint distribution of the data taking into account that p is unknown. And this is a uniform, this is a uniform density in interval 0, 1. So if we want to have the full information about the parameter after data has been observed, we just have to apply Bayes' rule, that in this case would look like this. And after doing some terms for pushing, we get that this posterior distribution is a beta with these kind of parameters. So you might say, oh my god, how do you know that this thing 1 divided by this is equal to this. It's because I'm very good at maths. No, but we always make tricks in maths. So this actually, we know that this is how a beta distribution looks like when it has these parameters. Well, actually, this plus 1 and plus 1. Okay. So there's no other solution, but the constant in the beta distribution is what remains afterward, what remains in the formula. So everything else has to be the constant part of the distribution, this thing here. So that's the only reason. And the good thing is that in the Bayesian setting, this is very easy to compute. So we know how to do this when we have uniform, because a uniform is actually a beta. It's a beta 1, 0.5, 0.5. So when you have prior beta and then you have a Bernoulli sample, then you know that the posterior is a beta again. So you don't really have to do any calculations because you know the parameter of the posterior distribution would be just to take the data, sum the data, and then plus 1, and then number of data points, sum them all, and then plus 1. So it's very easy to do, but only for some particular class of model. But in case that you cannot do this in closed form, you can always sample, or there are ways to sample and find the values of the parameters, or at least approximate them. I would also say something about terminology here, or different ways of using the posterior distribution. What we have seen so far is what is called the fully Bayesian approach, or what is called the fully Bayesian approach in AI. So for those who are mathematicians or statisticians, will find this terminology quite strange. So you're Bayesian or you're not Bayesian? I mean, can you be fully pregnant? I mean, you're pregnant or you're not? So being fully Bayesian is a bit strange. But in AI, it is used when to differentiate it from what is called the maximum a posteriori estimation approach. Because in what is called the MAP approach, we don't really need to compute the new denominator of the base rule, and because we just want to find what is the value of the parameters that maximize somehow the likelihood term, but penalized by the prior distribution, somehow penalized or regularized by the prior distribution. So in this sense, if you take that into account, that would be only the upper part of the fraction we have here. But we can also ignore the regularized interval or the prior distribution, and then what we would find is that we are doing just maximum likelihood estimation. So in this slide, we have more or less summarized three ways of carrying out inference that we can have. The map estimator is only one of the things that you can do once you have the posterior distribution. But if you are only interested in one point estimation, many times it is the case in AI algorithms, then you can just ignore the normalization factor in base group and just take the numerator. Okay. So let's go with Bayesian networks. I decided to start with an example so that we see that it's something that can be easily interpretable by humans. Assume we have the problem of detecting when there are forest fires. And we know that fire causes an increase in temperature and also will be related with the presence of smoke. But the only thing that we can observe is actually the measurements of 3 temperature sensors we have in different points in the forest and 1 smoke sensor as well. So that would be one model, or one way of modeling them. So what we have is that fire is causing temperature and smoke presence, and also the actual value of temperatures. The temperatures is obviously influencing the readings of the temperature sensor, and the presence of smoke is actually influencing the reading of the smoke sensor. But of course, if we are certain that there is smoke, then whatever the sensor says is irrelevant for us. We are certain that there is smoke, So that's what is actually related with the fact that there's fire or not. And the same happens with the temperature reading sensor. We don't care about the temperature readings if we are by all means certain that the temperature is, I don't know, 40 degrees, 38 degrees, or whatever. So this, what I said now, is actually encoded in the structure of the network. So we can know that without taking a deeper look into the model. Just watching the structure, reading the structure, we would be able to know that. I will explain later how we will do that. But on top of that, or inside that, we would also have a probability distribution that actually encodes all the information available about all the variables that are involved in the model. And that's the distribution that I've written under the graph. That is actually factorized as a set of various or much smaller probability distribution that only involves those variables that are connected according to the graph structure. For instance, we have this that corresponds to this mean here, this one corresponds to this mean here, and so on. And this one corresponds to this variable, and blah, blah, blah. So, one interesting thing of this kind of models is that they are somehow modular. So we can expand the models to include new variables reusing the information that we already had previously. So if we remember, the previous models now have included some other variables that could be related, like cigarette or, I don't know, barbecues. Well, it turns out that barbecues are a very important cause of fire in Spain, even though they are, of course, it's not allowed to have barbecues from May to, I don't know, November or something like that. But even though it's illegal, some people do it. And also smoking is a cause of, if you think about the huge disaster that is caused by such a simple act or such a simple event. Anyway, well, I've been working with, I've collaborated with environmental science people, and then you realize of how a very small action can have a great impact in the environment, and you never think about that. Well, anyway, we can include information about the season. I am enjoying a lot this thing, and I think it's the first time in my life I'll do this. Sorry, will be playing. If I play too much, just let me know. So we include new information, and of course we have to update, but only we have to update the part of the distribution that's looking. We still would have this. So I think this there's some text missing here. Right. It's amazing how many times you can see the slides go through your screen. And then only in the final presentation you realize that you're missing a variable. But anyway, so you can update the full conditional distribution just by including the corresponding factor here. For instance, this one would correspond to this one here, and the same with the other. So we have to update this one that corresponds to this connected to this other variable. So formally, we're starting to. I think we are more or less starting to find out what a Bayesian network is. And mathematically, it's just a pair composed by a directly as an acyclic graph, and a set of local distributions, local conditional distributions, so that each vertex in the graph corresponds to a random variable, and each local distribution, there's one local conditional distribution for each variable in the network that is conditional on the parents that variable has in the network. So the coding rule is that the joint distribution for all the variables in the network is the product of all the conditionals corresponding to each variable. So when it comes to interpreting the structure of the network, the good thing is that we only need to know three rules, three syntactic rules. And it is like that because it can be shown that any directed acyclic graph is actually composed by the union of these three basic structures. So you can always construct any graph using these kind of three Lego pieces and putting them together, and then you get your graph. So if you know how to what the meaning of each piece is, then you can interpret the whole graph. So you have this serial connection. And the interpretation rule is that information on A can go or can have an influence on C as long as P is not known. If P is known, we are certain about the value of P, then information doesn't flow from A to B, to C, or from C to A. The same happens when we have divergent connections, in which case, if we know the value of P, then let's say that the path between AC, blah, 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 and E is blocked, and then information cannot flow. So whatever we observe about A doesn't have any impact on C or E. And the third possible structure is a convergent connection, and that's interpreted in a different way, because in this case, the path is blocked when we don't know the value of A. As long as we or A or any of the variables underneath A. But if we know their value, we know the value of A or any of the variables underneath, then the information can flow from E to C and to E and so on. So if we know how these three structures are to be interpreted, then we can read the whole network. And I've put some examples here. In this first sample, for instance, I've indicated that this variable is observed and this other variable is observed. So my question is, would information on G be relevant for information on A and vice versa? In other words, can information flow from A to G or from G to A? Is anyone able to answer that question? It is not. Yes, that's a good answer. Actually, I found that it's more or less. I put this red line here. That means that those paths are blocked. But yes, obviously, actually, you were right. Look at that information here. Can flow, but because can flow or can it flow? Let's see. Information can go down here, down here, down here. But we have some observed variable here, so information can follow this path as well. Information cannot follow this path because it is blocked here. So let's try to follow here, and there's no observation here or underneath L, so the information can no longer progress. It can still progress from this path, following this path, sorry. But finally, you find that this is not observed, we have no information about this and no information about this, so it is blocked. So we cannot finally reach G. So you were correct, and we cannot send information, or information cannot flow from A to G and vice versa. And this is what is called a D-separation. When information cannot flow from one point to another point, then we say that those points, those variables are D-separated. Here, what I put in green color is the path where information can flow, but it cannot flow outside that path. And well, let's take a look at it and say yes.
Very silly question. Why is it not D-separation?
It's called because of the directional dependencies determined by the graph. I think. Yes, I think that's yeah. Yes. You can also define this kind of separation in undirected graphs. But it's I went directly to Bayesian networks, but there are other graphical models to represent probabilistic models. For instance, Markov networks where the links are not directed. And then you can also define separation, but it's not the interpretation rule is not the same. And one final example, just to train a little bit, to practice a little bit. Here we have that we know the value of variables B and D, and then using the interpretation rule that we gave before, it turns out that the information can only flow here to here, this way. But it cannot go to this part of the graph. But if we finally know the value of A as well, then information can flow, cannot flow at all on the graph. So the graph is totally blocked, and any 2 points in the graph are separated from each other. Okay. So the good thing is that we will see that we can take advantage of the structure to define efficient algorithms for carrying out inferences on the probabilistic models that are encoded at the Bayesian net. Now we will turn to something that is quite useful, and actually we will use it a lot in the tutorials, and it's what is called the plate notation. Plate notation is meant to avoid plotting many repeated structures and or substructures. And the most clear example is a very simple model where we have a sample of n independent random variables, all of them depending on one parameter theta. Again, whenever I say variables, they could be random vectors, and whenever I say a parameter, it could be more than one parameter, so it could be a set of unknown parameters. So this can be represented using, let's say, unfolded notation, absolutely detailed notation in this way, where we have that each data sample depends on the unknown parameter. And actually, it is like this because we have the density of the variable given the unknown parameters. And x again given the unknown parameter. And here we have yes, like this. So the joint distribution that we have is actually given the parameter, which is the product. So this is factor in. And then outside this product we have I of theta. So this is actually one representation of the joint of the parameter and the data that we have in the Bayesian setting that we saw before, but factorized according to the graph structure that we have here. So, but there's a much more compact way of representing this, and this is the plate notation. In the plate notation, what we do is that we put inside a box those structures that are repeating, and then index them by some given index. So that would mean I'll put outside the box what is not changing according to that index. So that would be something like this, where we are avoiding to put n times the variable xi when we can just put it once and say that it repeats n times. Okay. I will go through 2 or 3 examples explaining this plate notation because I said we will need it later. So, do everybody understand? This is quite important. What we are saying here. This probabilistic model is just a joint distribution. Let's say that the joint distribution of the sample and the parameter. So this is the most simple setting that we can think about. Okay. But we can think about more complex models. For instance, a linear regression model. But again, well, I'm being a bit Bayesian. If you can be a bit Bayesian, I mean, I'm considering that the parameters are random variables. So the first maybe strange thing that you are noting, or you might notice here, is that there are some things that are not inside a circle. The things that are not inside a circle in a graphical model like this are things that are not random. So they are fixed values, and we will explain now, in this case, what they mean. So consider a simple or linear regression, but in a very simple setting. So what we have here is that we are saying that y is, let's say, w0 plus w1 times x plus some random error psi. So this is what we are modeling here. So it's a linear regression model with, where by variable y is a linear function of x, and then have some random error epsilon I. So it can be expressed in this way, as we have in the slide, where I'm compressing or using this compact notation to indicate that xi is actually this plus 1, 1, just for notational convenience. And we would assume that epsilon follows a normal distribution with precision gamma. So the precision is the inverse of the variance. Then we will also assume that W, the parameters of the regression model, is actually a vector, W0, W1, follows a bivariate normal distribution with mean 0, and which means that say mu W0 equals 0 and mu W1 equals 0 as well. And having the as covariance matrix, the identity 2 times 2 matrix. Then we can represent this as a Bayesian network in this way. And these dots here means that we would have this for element 1 in the sample, element 2 in the sample, blah, 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 until element n in the sample. So we would actually need, if we had a sample of size 10, then the Bayesian network representing that would have 10 times this structure, repeated 10 times. So we can compress that and release a much more efficient presentation if we use this plate notation, where we put inside this box, whatever is repeating over the sample, and then just indicate that this is repeated for these values or the index y. Yes. And as I mentioned, what is outside circles are parameters or things that are fixed. Xi is means to the data, that's a fixed value, and the gamma, mu 0, and sigma 0 are actually fixed values. That corresponds to the parameters or the prior distribution that we are putting on epsilon and on W, right? One more example. Well, you know for what linear regression model. This linear regression can be used for predicting the value of y in terms of the values of x. So, and another very common model in artificial intelligence is factor analysis. The factor analysis model, or being more precise, that would be a probabilistic factor analysis model. All of the models that the models that I have shown before, well, actually the regression model and also the model here are called latent variable models. What do we mean by latent variable models? Probabilistic models where some of the variables cannot be observed. For instance, as we are considering that the parameters are random variables, but we obviously cannot observe the values of the parameters. So in that sense, they are latent variable models. But even though that's a formal meaning of latent variable model, usually when one speaks about latent variable models, one is also speaking about the hidden structure or the unobserved variables. So not only the fact that there are variables that cannot be observed, but also that they have some structure, and that structure could have a meaning in our problem. So trying to find out what the structure of the latent variable model or the relationship between the latent variable models are could be could have some value to our model. So what's a factor analysis model? It's a way of summarizing high-dimensional models instead of in terms of fewer variables that are called factors. So in this case, what we would have is that each local model is trying to capture the information in this case J, random, normal random variables, and we will try to compress that information using only K, with K lower than J, also normal random variables. And that's a way of, I think it was Harry who said, who spoke about compressing information. And actually, when I did statistics for computer science students, and they usually find statistics quite boring. I must say that I also found it boring when I was a student. But then I say, well, you could think about probability distributions as ways of compressing information. Actually, if you have a normal distribution, you are compressing an infinite set of possible values of the variable only with two values, the mean and the variance. So knowing the mean and the variance of the population, and the population is from minus infinity to plus infinity, then you can do everything you need. So you have exactly the same information. If you had all the uncountable infinite values, as if you only have the two values, mean and variance. So that's a very efficient way of compressing information. Of course, it doesn't apply to any kind of information, but if you have a population that actually corresponds to a probability density, you are really compressing information. And that's one of the good things of a probabilistic model. You actually have a very compact model. So this is one thing of even compressing things one step ahead. So we already have distributions, but still we can have some redundancy, and we're trying to, in case that there are some dependencies within the variable. So with the factor analysis model or probabilistic factor analysis model, what we are doing is trying to compress that information and trying to find out what are the really determining factors in the problem that we are analyzing. So following what I said before, we see that this local model repeats all over the data, so we can compress it using, in this case, nested plates, where we can nest plates as many times as we want. But the key to interpret the nested plates here is that if one node in the graph is inside, let's say, two nested plates, then it will have two indices, one corresponding to this plate and another one corresponding to the outer plate. And the rest is, can be interpreted in the same way. Here we have, again, a Bayesian setting where W is a normal density. Where is it? I didn't write it, I think. No, sorry. W is the mean of a random variable, so you can put a prior on it. That would be a normal density with precision gamma, so that should be, I guess, without this. I don't know. Could be like that.
Sorry, do you mean W is normally distributed 0, 1 over gamma?
Yeah, it could be like that, yes. Yes. And then the sigma is a prior on the variance. Sorry, this theta is a prior on the variance, and could be exponential or could be inverse gamma, something like that. So you could have a prior also on the variance. So, one more model, and I think this is the last example of text notation, but this is extremely frequently used in artificial intelligence. It's a mixture of Gaussians that is used for clustering. In this case, what you have is a set of Gaussians, could be multivariate Gaussians as well. And we have individuals that can belong to different groups, but we don't know what group they belong to. And then that group is modeled by a multinomial distribution, or multinomial variable, sorry. And what we have here is that the... Okay, I didn't put the unboard rotation. Yes, I didn't put it. Well, but you can figure out it's just that you have something like this. Say the unboard model would be, you have the zeta, or each local model would be just like this.
Excuse me.
Yes.
X should have one index, should be this. Is it so high or so high usually?
You're right.
Okay.
Yes. Who said that? Very good, yes.
It's a bit, I was confused with the previous definition.
Yes.
Because when you don't have place notation, it seems like there should only be J-axis, right?
Yeah, but this is the local model, so this will be for one precise y, let's say. Yes. For For instance, E equal 1 or whatever. So actually, all of these should be particularized to the model we are. So that would be Y actually Y. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes.
One of those for each latent variable.
Sorry?
You have one of those for each latent variable.
For each?
For each set.
Yeah, you have one of these for each. Well, this is the local model. It means that you have one model like this for each observation in the data. So, let's say each element is sample. A sample is actually a collection of random variables. So what we have here is one instance of this Bayesian network for each observation in the data. Where by an observation we mean a value for all these j normal variables. So you would be actually replicating them as many times as elements you have in the sample. In this case, capital N times. So that would be then the representation of the mixture of Gaussians, where you have this local representation that you have in the first plate, and then the parameters that are put outside the plate. But some of them depend on the variable. We have j normal variables, so each one has their own parameters. That's why we have the other plate indexed by j. And then outside that, we have the prior values of the parameters of the prior distribution that are fixed quantities, and therefore they are not surrounded by circles. So let's go back to the, for instance, the linear regression model here. How do we use? Okay, we have the Bayesian network here, but what is does it make any sense to have a probabilistic model, or how do we use that in practice? Because in practice, well, the only thing that I want to do is to know what is the value of y if I observe this. So we can do that. So what we just need is to know, in order to predict that, we need to know what is the value of the unknown parameters w. So what we can do is to somehow carry out inference and try to find out what is the posterior distribution on w, given that you have observed this data. So actually the task is to compute this, say, posterior distribution of w given x. When I put x without the data, I mean all the data sample. Without the sub-index, I mean all the data samples. So once you have this distribution, then you can use it to somehow find out or simulate a value of w, or get the maximum posterior value of w, whatever, and then you can plug this in here, and then you somehow simulate a value for epsilon, and then you can get a prediction for y. So there are ways that you can use the regression model in practice once you have the posterior distribution of the parameters. So that's what we want to do. And how do we learn what is the value? Or take a think that the way in which that we are estimating the value of the parameters from the data is actually carrying out probabilistic inference, computing the posterior distribution. So making inference in a probabilistic graphical model is somehow equivalent to learning from data. So that's why we say that in a Bayesian setting, learning and inference are connected problems. So we are carrying out learning actually by making inference on the models that we are using to represent. So we can use inference on the Bayesian network. That's why we represent it with one instantiation for each data point, because by carrying out inference on that model, what we get is an estimation of the unknown parameters in a natural way. So, what do I mean by inference in a Bayesian network? Formally, what we have is that we have our representation of a probabilistic model with n variables, and we have some evidence. By evidence, we mean that we know the value of some of the variables in the network. Let's call it xe. There could be other types of evidence, what's called soft evidence, where you might know the probability that some variable cannot have this value, but can have some other possible values, or you can even have some distribution on the variable, on some of the variables of interest. There can be different types of evidence, but the most common would be what we call here evidence, that is just that we know that one variable is taking one precise value. And then in that scenario, what we want to compute is the posterior distribution of some variable of interest, xi, or some set of variables of interest, given that we know the value of x. And there are different ways of doing that. Of course, we have the exact and approximate ways of carrying out inference. And the first one would be just do the brute force. So compute the joint distribution of all the variables in the network, and particular or instantiate that distribution to the observed values, and then marginalize out all the variables that are not of interest for us. Then the result of that process would be that we would have the posterior distribution of xi after normalizing the resulting distribution. But there are methods that don't use the brute force directly because the joint distribution can be just too highly dimensional, and we could be unable to handle that. So we can make use of the structure in the network and work with a smaller distribution and compute the distribution in a more efficient way. We will learn how to do that. And we could also adopt approximate strategies that could be based on sampling, but could be also view deterministic. And along the course, you will see both alternatives. And perhaps it is a good moment to make a short break. Okay, great. When I say 5 minutes break for my students, my local university, then they usually take 15 minutes or something like that. Great. You're back, or mostly back, so I think we can restart. And I was saying that we have both exact and approximate solutions to the inference problem. And but just before going to that, I just have received some feedback, and perhaps it's worth that we go back. And when we find here, for instance, here, what is it's really useful to have a Bayesian setting in a linear regression model, because it's very well known how the parameters on W can be, or the parameters the W can be estimated. So what is the reason why we choose to have a Bayesian representation of the linear regression problem? Well, of course, you can learn the parameters. You can learn the parameters in a linear regression using least squares, for example. But the difference between that approach and the Bayesian approach is that from the very beginning, you have a model that can be used, and the model can be improved as you receive new data. That's one of the interesting features of Bayesian models, especially taking into account the motivation examples that we gave in the beginning of the lecture. So if you are receiving data, for instance, in the self-driving car, you are receiving data in a streaming fashion, then you somehow need to find a way to update your model, taking into account that new data. That's not easy to do if you have to compute least squares, because you need a matrix with the data and compute the error square differences in order to optimize it. And something similar happens with maximum likelihood also in big data, say, or streaming data context. Then it can be difficult to apply it in that sense. So the good thing of the Bayesian model is related to what I said about learning connected to inference. So we can start with our model, and our model will have operational value even before observing data, because we have the priors. So we can say something about W, the parameters, from the very beginning. But as we receive data, then we update the posterior distribution, and we have a more accurate estimation of W, of the parameters of the linear regression model. And it can always be used in any moment when you need to give a prediction about one. But you can still receive new data and update the value, update the posterior distribution. That in this case would play the role of the prior distribution So the posterior distribution, for some, after after analyzing some data, becomes the prior distribution when new data arrives. So this is a constantly updated model, and that's what we found what we find quite interesting when applied to this AI setting, especially when you have streaming data or data that comes in a continuous fashion. But also, is this better than maximum likelihood in this context? Well, actually, both can be somehow combined. Because actually, I think in some points in the tutorials, I think there will be examples where we will be maximizing the likelihood of the parameters as well. So you will be, you could also somehow combine maximum likelihood with the Bayesian approach if you receive data in batches. So you analyze a batch of data, so you're receiving streaming data, then you wait to have, I don't know, 10 items, then apply somehow, or at least in some parts of the maximum likelihood, and then adopt the Bayesian approach combined with it. So, yes. Sorry.
We have the regularization for the linear for if we do it using maximum. Is the model good here or?
Yeah. Well, I didn't consider regularized models like you mean like the lasso or things like that. But they could be modeled also in a patient setting, but I didn't put that as an example. But yes, you could have that. Yes, you could have a. Yes, yes. So let's first try to compute or carry out inference in an exact way. So think about this small network with 5 variables. So we would actually have conditional. We would have a conditional of x5 given x4, then another conditional of x4 given x2 and x3, and a conditional for x3 given x1 and for x2 given x1, and then one unconditional on the distribution on x1. And assume we are interested in x5. So we want to know what is the posterior distribution, and just for making it easy, we will assume that no variables are observed and all the variables are discrete. So why do I say discrete? Because I can just marginalize them out by summing out. If they were continuous, then we would have to integrate them out. Okay? So we start with the most simple formulation. So if we want to know what is the marginal distribution for x5, then we have to take the joint distribution and remove all the variables that are not x5. But of course, in order to do that, we would need a distribution or somehow a way of encoding the information of all of them. We don't have that. Instead of that, what we have is that the joint distribution is factorized as a product of these densities, or these probability mass functions in this case, like this. Then we can decide to do these summations one by one and try to see how it looks like. So if we take out x1 in the first place, then we find out that only these densities here, these mass functions here, contain variable x1. So we can do this operation only here, and this would actually mean to multiply all the mass functions here, and after multiplying them, we would have to marginalize x1, marginalizing out x1, and that will result in a function that would depend only on x2 and x3. So what we have after summing out one variable is the same problem again. So we have to solve the same problem, but we have one variable less. That's just the way of doing inference, but very basically. Actually, this is what is called the variable elimination algorithm. What is the key point here? The key point here is, first, that depending on the order in which you sum out variables, the number of distributions or the size of the distributions that you have to compute here can be big or not so big, depending on how vast we are when we are choosing the order of elimination. And another thing is that this process gives you also only information about one variable of interest. If there are more than one variable of interest, then we would have to repeat this process over and over as many times as variables we have. So there are more, let's say, more elaborate algorithms that try to do variable elimination, but in a wiser way, so you can have the marginal distribution on some variables of interest at the same time. But we are not going to take a look at them because, as a general rule, we could say that exact methods that give exact solutions can only be applied in reasonably small models. So, unfortunately, in artificial intelligence, most of the times we are dealing with huge models, and exact methods would have little application, I'm afraid. At least that's what my experience says. So, one way or another, we have to resort on other methods. But of course, small problems are still of interest. So, I also wanted to say that, and we are kind of overwhelmed by publicity about big data, and everybody should be working with big data, but still there are problems that need to be solved and that perhaps don't involve so many variables. I mean, not millions of variables or terabytes or petabytes of data, whatever. But those problems do make sense, and there we could use exact methods. Such kind of problems, we use exact methods. But actually, just to make a break about that, I was kind of scared. Yeah. I can't hear you, so. I mean, just for making the example easy, I'm not considering any variable to be observed. Yes. It's just to make this fairly easy. Otherwise, we would have to. The notation would be a bit more nasty. But I was saying, I don't know, just to make a break, I think it could be really relevant is to. We all are doing research somehow related to big data, but if you look at what big companies are investing in research, you cannot avoid thinking, okay, can I really do anything? I mean, just Amazon or Google are investing more money in research, mainly research about big data, probabilistic models, or deep models. Only in this field they are investing more money than Spain is investing in any kind of research. Medicine, all kind of research, artificial intelligence, public, private. So, so in that sense you think, okay, am I really able to do or to produce any result of interest that isn't going to be found before by Google or Amazon? So it's kind of scary, and you're younger, so you need to know that. So, good. So let's go for, let's analyze a little bit this process. So I try to formalize here the very easy operation that I carried about in the previous slide. And what we have is that basically the algorithms. The difference here is connected to your question about the empty set. If it was in the empty set, then we would have to restrict all the distribution in T to the evidence. So that would mean if we have the discrete variables whose distribution can be modeled by a table, then we would have to keep the rows or the columns that correspond to the observed values. That would be the difference. And then what we do for each variable in the network is to multiply all the densities or mass functions that contain that variable in their domain, and then marginalize out by summing out or integrating out if it was continuous. So what we get here is that the complexity is mainly in that step. Because if we are thinking about continuous variable, discrete variable, then the size of the distribution can be exponential in the number of variables that are involved in that distribution. In the case of continuous variable, it's not necessarily like that, but it can be as well. Well, so that's what I say in this final slide about exact inference, and is that the complexity depends on the product of functions that can grow, whose size can grow exponentially. In the case of the split variable, if we think about normal variables, then the growth will be quadratic because that will be the size necessary to represent the covariance matrix, and also, it turns out that the representation of densities in the continuous case is relevant because in the end we will need to implement this in a computer. So we need a way. It is fairly easy for discrete variables where you can represent the distribution by a table with probability numbers inside. But if you think about continuous variable, then the scenario that we find is a lot more heterogeneous. So we can have Gaussian densities that can be somehow parameterized and found a way to represent them. But if you combine, what do you have if you combine a Gaussian density with a gamma, with an exponential, then it's difficult to represent the result. So unless we use algebraic calculus like in Mathematica or something like that, but if we use Mathematica, then everything turns very slow. So it's, we have to find a trade-off between this representational issue, and what we in practice, what is actually long is to assume that the model follows some kind of distribution and then go ahead with that, even if data says the contrary. So I know from now speaking to statisticians, where in statistics we traditionally follow one approach, that is we validate or somehow check that the model assumptions are fulfilled, and then we apply the model. But in AI, many times, what you find in the literature is that a Gaussian model is applied even without verifying that the model is actually, the underlying model is actually Gaussian. Why is that? Theoretically, it can be incorrect, but it's the only thing you can do from a practical point of view. So the AI approach traditionally is based on validating the model afterwards. So I use this, and then I test the model and somehow try to figure out what the error that I'm making, whether the error that I'm making is affordable or not. But of course, you have to be aware that you are making one modeling assumption that maybe is not supported by the data. Okay, let's go to approximate algorithms. As said before, there are sampling algorithms and also deterministic algorithms. I will focus on the sampling algorithms, and I will very quickly mention also one kind of deterministic algorithms based on variational inference, but you will learn about variational inference tomorrow. So, what do I mean by Monte Carlo inference algorithm? Well, the basic idea is that a Bayesian network is a representation of a joint probability distribution. Therefore, what we are actually doing is encoding information about a whole population. What population? Exactly the population that is composed by all the possible configurations of the variables that are in our probability distribution. The problem is that that population can be extremely large. It could be infinite, actually. And therefore, we cannot handle that. Because in case we had the entire population available, then the inference problem would be basically counting cases. So there would be no need to model the probability distribution and carry out inference in this way. The thing is that we never had, we are thinking about cases where we don't have the whole population. But we only have a sample of it. The sample is much smaller than the whole population. But that's the only thing we have to work with. So Monte Carlo methods, what they do in this context is to draw a sample and somehow draw a sample out of that population and then use that sample to estimate the posterior distribution of the variables that we are interested in. So there are two things that we have to define in order to have a Monte Carlo methods for an inferencing Bayesian network. One is the sampling mechanism, and the other one is what is the procedure that we will use to estimate the parameters or compute the probabilities in the posterior distribution from that sample. That's what is called the estimator. What estimator will be used to compute the unknown parameters? And I will speak about two possible alternatives. One is called importance sampling, and the other one is called market chain Monte Carlo. Or maybe particularly give something that is probably speaking about. So, in what concerns importance sampling, I really love importance sampling because it was the subject of my thesis, part of the prehistory of yes. Importance sampling is basically it's a general methodology for approximating the expected value of a random variable. So assume we have a random variable with density or probability mass function p. What we are interested in this case is in computing the expected value of some function of the random variable. It can be the random variable itself, but it can be any function, measurable function of the random variable. And the expectation is computing according to distribution p. So that's what we have here. So what we do is to do a very common trick. I think all of us have used it in our school and our college courses to do exercises or to prove theorems. We multiply and divide by the same thing. So we are doing here is to multiply and divide by the same thing. Of course, this should be something different from 0, otherwise we couldn't divide. And actually, by doing that, we are doing nothing, so we are not altering the results. But the good thing is that we are expressing this thing that is in terms of a probability density p, in terms of an expectation that depends on a different thing, that is p star. And this p star has been chosen by us, and could be any density. It could be the most simple density that you can think about. It doesn't matter, because what we have is that this expected value is exactly the same as the one that you are trying to compute. So we have formulated the problem in an alternative way that could somehow simplify the estimation problem. Why? Because here, this P would typically be the joint distribution in the Bayesian net, or the posterior distribution on the variable of interest in a Bayesian net. And we are assuming that we cannot know that, because if we are using approximate methods, it's because we cannot use exact methods due to the size of the problem or whatever. So we are assuming that we are not able to compute that P, so we cannot compute this expected value. So we are doing is choosing a easier distribution to sample from, and then we have expressed that expected value as an expected value with respect to this more easy to sample distribution. You might see, okay, but you still have P here. But that's a different thing, because what we are going to do now is to solve the problem or estimate the expected value using a sample mean estimator. That's very well known that it converges as the sample size increases to its exact value. And we are estimating that expectation by the sample mean. The sample mean of what? Of what we have here, but is translated for the sample. And this sample is drawn from P star. P star is to sample from. But you might still say that we have a P here. Yes, but we are evaluating P for precise values of the variables. And we can do that because if we have the Bayesian network, we have the factorization of the Bayesian network, and we can know the value of each conditional distribution for one precise value of the variable. That's no problem. The problem is to compute the whole distribution and compute the joint distribution, and from that the posterior distribution on the variables of interest. So this is easy to do, and this is also easy. So easy, everything is easy, but is it good? Not necessarily good. Why? Well, we'll think about that afterwards or now. Let's do it now. Yes, let's do it now. Okay. The key here is that by doing this, what we obtain is what is called an unbiased estimator of the quantity that we actually want to estimate. But the precision of an unbiased estimator depends on the variance of the estimator. So actually the mean the mean square error of the estimator is actually the variance of the estimator if it is unbiased. So what it turns out is that the variance of this estimator is actually, or depends on the variance of this ratio here. So taking that into account, if there's a high variance in the ratio between P and T star, so for some values of X, then they are very similar, but for some other values of X, they are very different, then it means that the variance is high. And therefore, the error that we are making by estimating EP by this RP, this estimated E of P, then the error would be large. So the key point is how we choose P star. And that's a very difficult problem. It's a very difficult problem. There's a lot of literature about that. For instance, you could use to, or you can follow some optimality criteria, but well, this outside the scope of this talk or this lecture. But you have to be aware that that can be a problem indeed. But that's something that can be solved using large samples. So you have a large variance, and you would need a large sample to, because the variance decreases as the sample increases as well. So that would be a way to reduce the error, but of course then you would need more time to simulate, and that's something you would like ideally to avoid. Okay. So that's something you have to take into account when you decide to use important sampling. So if we instantiate important sampling to probabilistic inference and into inference in Bayesian networks, what we have is something like this. So this is something very ugly, but basically what we are saying is that assume that we want, for instance, to compute the probability that some variable of interest is taking values inside a given interval, given that we have observed that these variables are taking some precise value. So the only thing we have to do is to integrate, up here we have to integrate from the joint distribution all the variables except xi. We leave xi to the very last step so that we can integrate over AB. And this is the normalizing constant. And I just use this strange notation to indicate that we can have continuous or discrete variables. So some of them will be integrated out, the other will be summed out. Okay? So that will be the formal formulation of the inference problem in Bayesian network. But what I'm interested in is in showing that it can be easily formulated as an important sampling problem, because we can express this probability that ugly probability that I put in the previous slide as an expected value. So if we take the expected value using the posterior distribution, this is the identity function, or the indicator, function on interval AB, then we are expressing this as an expected value. If it is an expected value, then we can use important sampling. So we define a P star, we sample from P star, and then we can easily estimate the probability of interest just by computing the sample mean in this way. So this will be our estimator. Again, we have here something to estimate, but we showed some years ago that that can be estimated using the same sample just by calculating the sum of all the weights by calling these the weights of the important sample. So with this I found this natural approach, then you can solve a lot of problems, and we will particularize that to one example, to the linear regression problem, so that you can see that you can estimate different quantities using the same procedure. Was it me? There was a sound over there. Okay. I think I would just say that it's muted. Taking the chance to check the mail. So that's something you learn when you're fun. Sometimes, luckily not many times, but some days have 4 or 5 hours of teaching, and of course we have breaks. But when we have breaks, then students come to, can I hear this? And then I use, I don't know if I muted the phone, just to check the email. Okay. So, as I said before, the crucial step is to choose the sampling mechanism, the P-star distribution. Because a careless choice can lead to even discarding also the sample. Take a look at this very simple example. Assume we have two very simple Bayesian networks with the sample like this. And we have this conditional distribution. Well, the marginal distribution for xy being equal to 0 for x1 is 0, 9. Therefore, well, I'm assuming binary variables, so they take values 0 and 1. Therefore, the probability of x1 being equal to 1 would be 0, 1. And the probability of x2 being equal to 0, given that x1 is also equal to 0, is 0. And the probability of h1 being equal to 0, given that x1 is 1, is 0.5. And let's assume that x2 is observed to be equal to 0. So we are considering that this is happening. x2 is equal to 0. And we have freedom to choose P star. So let's make two assumptions, or let's consider two possible alternatives. One is to choose P star to be uniform. So just choose two possible values for x1 at random. So if we choose at random x1, then we will find that on average 50% of the samples will have to be discarded. Why? Because we know that x2 is equal to 0. If we sample x1 at random, then 50% of the times will be equal to 1, and the other 50% will be equal to 0. Whenever it's equal to 0, then we will find that given that x2 is observed to be equal to 0, then that configuration has probability 0, so it's useless. Why is it useless? Because it doesn't sum anything when computing the sample in the estimator. So that term is equal to 0, so it doesn't contribute to the sum that we are carrying out in the port of sample. But assume we choose a more elaborate alternative, and we try to be clever and say, we say instead of choosing uniform, that is the most naive way of sampling, I will be wise and choose the marginal distribution of x1. You say, okay, I'm using more information because it comes from one of the factors of the reason. Then it turns out that 90% of the samples are discarded because 90% of the times x1 will be sampled to be 0, approximately 90% of the time. Then we will come here and find that this probability, the probability of the configuration is 0, so we have to discard all the samples, or 90% of the samples approximately. So, well, there are ways to handle this, but of course, the most accurate sampling distribution that you get, then the more time you need to compute it. Therefore, you have to find that trade-off when choosing that. Let's go with an example related to not really kind of that's a kind of running sample. As long as you use it more than once, then it's a running sample. So it's the second time we use it. Going back to the linear regression, so this is this on the upper part of the slide is what we introduced when we showed the plate notation. And analyzing it, actually what we have to compute is the posterior distribution of the parameters, and non-parameters W, given the data. And we know that's normal, multivariate normal with some mean and some covariance matrix. And what I said here is, what I put here is, what is this mu and this sigma? Actually, mu is one expected value of the posterior distribution for W0, the first coordinate of the vector W, and for W1 as well. And then we have the covariance matrix, actually information about the variances of W0 and W1, and the covariance of both parameters. So what we have to do is to sample all the variables in the network. We have to sample epsilon w, and actually by doing that we are also sampling y, because y is a function of x and epsilon. And we can assume, for instance, p star to be, p star can be whatever we want. Say that we can assume that, or p star is the product of three independent standard normal distributions, just to say something. In this way, we could find the values for epsilon w and 0 and w1. And taking into account that the variance is, can be expressed as the effective value of the square of wk, okay, well, to 0 and 1, minus the effective value, then raised to the power of 2. And that the covariance can be also expressed in terms of expected values. What I'm trying to do here is to express everything as expected values so that we can use important sampling. But it turns out that we have to actually estimate 5 expected value of something. What things? Things that are actually function of the random variables that we are working with. So, but also taking into account that this expected value are taken with respect to the posterior distribution. So we don't need, we don't know the posterior distribution. What do we do? What we do is to generate a sample from this P star that was the product of standard normal distributions, and then we just estimate using that sample. We estimate all the expectations just by changing what we are doing here is to change the function that we are actually estimating, because the other thing is exactly the same. Well, that I put G, not to put the joint distribution, I mean the posterior distribution, and then the numerator that we had in the previous formula, so I just compressed it. And I put C to indicate all these variables together. Okay? So we just have to sample all the unknown quantities in the Bayesian network and evaluate the joint distribution, and the the posterior distribution, and then in this case it would be a joint distribution because there are no observations beyond the data x, and x is not a variable. And then we would have straight away one estimation of all the quantities that we are interested in. Okay?
Sorry, what's the p hat of x?
Sorry?
What's the p hat of x?
This is the probability of the observed values that can be estimated. This is yes. So that's the probability of the observed values that, well, actually, can be also regarded as the probability of how that is translated into y, that is a function of observed values. But basically, it's just computed by summing all the weights in that expression. That's important sampling. We have seen that's quite flexible, quite general, but it can have problems. It's not always easy to apply because you need to choose P star, and if you don't use it, you didn't choose it carefully, then you can have problems, as we saw in the example that I gave. That was maybe an extreme example, but it is not so extreme if we think about discrete variables. When we think about the continuous variable, then it's more difficult. Usually you have Gaussian variables. You can be more or less wrong, but not to the point of getting a zero probability or a zero density so that you have to discard the sample. But if you have discrete variables, then you can easily have zeros. And if you have zeros in your probability mass function, you can easily get. And that actually what my thesis was about how to avoid zero when you were sampling. Sorry. And then we turn to market chain Monte Carlo. And here the assumption that we are changing is the sampling mechanism and also the estimator that we are using for estimating the parameters from the sample that we obtain. So the procedure that we will follow here is that instead of sampling, by the way, we will assume that we have an initial configuration of all the unobserved variables in the network. So we have an initial configuration, and then we will start sampling all the variables in the network are conditional on the previous value of the on the previous configuration. Why are we doing this? Because in this way it can be much easier to sample. Because you can, for instance, follow give something, and give something basically consists of generating this new item in the sample or this new configuration in the sample by taking into account the value of the previous configuration. Because in this way, as I will show in the next slide, then the sampling problem is fairly restricted. And what you get after that is that you are sampling with the exact probability distribution in the network. So that's a great advantage. You are now you are using a D star that can be very different from the distribution in the network. By introducing this clip, you are able to sample from the exact distribution in the network. But it has there's something that we have to pay in exchange of doing that, and I will explain that later. But the idea is that every new configuration is computed conditional on the already existing one. So assume we have already one configuration. Initially, that would be this initial configuration of the variables in the network. And the new configuration, or each, is generated by sampling the variables one by one. So there will be some order in the variable, not necessarily a topological order, it can be any order. And every item, or every variable in the configuration, should this be J? I think so. Yes. Each variable in the configuration should be just I can delete things here. Okay. And yes. So this new variable will be simulated from one distribution or density. We will see now later which one is. But it's conditional on the previous sample up to the variable that we have already simulated in the new configuration. And no, sorry, just the other way around. Based on the previous sample, I have done the same thing that I have deleted, but only for the variables that we have not simulated so far in this new configuration. Because once we have generated a new value for the configuration, then we use that new value in this conditional density. So we start with the initial configuration, and then say we want to simulate x1, then we take the condition of x1 given the rest of the variables. But once we have a value for x1, then we plug it in here, and then we simulate x2, taking into account this new value and the old values of the remaining variables. Okay? And we do that, and we will have a new configuration that will be our new element in the sample, and so on. By doing so, the sample that we obtain comes from the exact distribution that is represented in Bayesian network. What is the problem? The problem is that the elements in the sample are no longer independent. Instead, they form a Markov chain. So they depend on the previously generated sample, as we have seen here. So that dependence can be problematic because I will show you now an example trying to illustrate that. But the problem is that the dependence between these elements can give something to converge quite slowly. But also there's a big problem. Actually, it's an empty hard one. Getting an initial configuration with positive probability can be hard. And this problem is just as hard as carrying out inference comparison level. So if you have only continuous variables, for instance, only Gaussian variables, then it's very easy because whatever configuration you get will have a positive density. But if you have discrete variables that have zeros in their distribution, I mean, there are some conditional, or some values cannot happen conditional for something that has happened before, then you can very easily get configurations with zero probability, and that can be a problem. There are alternatives or ways to try to overcome this problem. For instance, what is called blocking with sampling, in which configurations are not simulated one by one the variables in the new configuration, but they are simulated by blocks. In this way, you try to somehow reduce the dependence with the previous one, at least to some extent. So, what does give something mean when it comes to simulate the Bayesian network? For instance, if we take a look at this Bayesian network. Sorry about the colors. Yeah, I think this. Yeah. Well, at least S5 can be easily seen. I'm almost colorblind, so but when you try to use this latex packages to draw Bayesian network, the temptation to use colors is very high. So, and of course, you don't want to use the same colors as everybody uses. But if the user, if everybody uses a color, it's for some reason. So don't be innovative about that. So, I try to be, and the result is very bad. So, we have these 8 variables, and we are interested in S5. And the good thing about give something is that, as we are simulated on the previous configuration, then using let's say the D-separation criteria, it turns out that X5, or each variable in the network, in this particular case S5, only depends on the variable of what is called its Markov blanket. The Markov blanket of variables, the set of the parents, the children, and the parents of the children of the variables. And it can be shown that a variable is independent of the rest of the variables in the Bayesian network when we know the value of the variables in the Markov blanket. So that's why Markov chain Monte Carlo is allowing, or to give something is allowing to simulate with the exact distribution. Because as we know, as we always know a value for the rest of the variables in the network, we can always have this Markov blanket instantiated. And therefore, we can simulate with exact distribution, because the exact distribution is just the product of the conditional distribution of the variables in the Markov blanket. Then you would have to normalize afterwards, so that what you get here is a normalized probability distribution, meaning that it sums to 1, okay? But still we have the problem, as I said, of generating that initial configuration, and also the slow convergence problem. About the slow convergence, I have an illustrated example here. Here I didn't forget to put the H1, H2 network in the previous slide, so I have to do that by hand. What we have here is a similar setting, but now, again, I have considered only binary variables, so that's big variables. And what we have is, instead of putting x1 equals 0 or blah blah blah, I put just x2 or not x2 or x1 or not x1. One would be 0 and the other one would be 1, okay? And what we have is that these conditional probabilities are equal, and both are very close to 1. Let's call them delta. And a number very close to 1. And the probability of x1 is equal to 0.5. It means that the probability of not x1 will be equal to 0.5 as well. Now assume that we have, in the initial configuration, we have that x1 is equal to little x1. And now we have to get a value, to obtain a new value for x2. Only conditional on the Markov blanket. I haven't noticed the Markov blanket by W here, okay? In this case, the Markov blanket is only x1, okay? Then we find that this probability is equal to delta. The delta is almost 1. So what we have to do is that if we draw one value, say x2 equal to x2, because that probability is almost 1, then the most likely value that we would get is little x2. Then we try to sample x2, given that we have the value of x2 known now. Then apply Bayes rule. We have that this probability, actually Markov blanket can be ignored because it's just x2. Applying Bayes rule, we have this expression here, where we know everything. This thing here would be delta. This thing here would be 0.5, and blah, 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 the same with the things in the normalizing constant. So if we do the math here, we find that that probability is, again, delta, which is very close to 1. So what it means is that we obtain again little x1. So most of the time, or actually with probability almost 1, we would be getting s2, little x1 and little x2. But if by chance one of the values changes to little, not x1, and then the other one will change as well. And then from then on, with probability almost 1, we would be getting the other configuration. That's no problem, that is correct. That is actually what the joint probability in the network is saying. The problem is that in some point we will stop sampling. And this is correct in the but if we stop, at some point we stop. So it can happen that most of the configurations that we have sampled are little s1, little s2, or not little s1, not little s2. We know that when n goes to infinity, then we will get 50% of the time both configurations. But it can very well happen that when we stop, we only got one of them. So the other one would be estimated to have probability equal to 0 when it actually has probability, or should have probability close to 0.5. I mean, if we are thinking about x1. So that's something that can happen even though the sampling procedure is correct and everything is correct, and that's what is supposed to happen. But the problem is that the change, I mean, the mixing rate in the change can be very slow. The mixing rate, understanding when we have different samples of the different values of the graph. So even though all this is mathematically correct, and actually is what we should expect, but the thing that the samples are dependent from the previous configuration are somehow imposing that the correcting is happening in a strange way. So while in important sampling, all the samples were independent, and the bad thing is that maybe they are not the sample that we should obtain, or the learners sample, because it is not the exact sample, but the good thing is that they are independent. In this case, they are not independent, and therefore we can find this problem. So a typical good practice is to run what is called a burning process. So you first run the algorithm for some time, or the sampling method for some time, and then discard or let the sample evolve for some time before you start to estimate the unknown parameters. What is a good thing? Well, if we turn to the linear regressive sample, then things simplify a lot because we could just use sample means as we are using the exact sample, then the weights that we have, I can go back here. As we are using the exact distribution here, when sampling, and we are using actually this distribution, then this is always equal to 1. So this term goes away, and also this term, because this term was actually extracted from here. So we just have to estimate the expected value as the sample mean or the parameter that we are interested in. So it's very easy in that sense. So in this sense it's very easy, but I have some shaded message there. I will now uncover that. Is that still you need to know a little more because when you're using the distribution in the Markov blanket, that's what I put here, but you still have to be able to multiply them. So you have to be somehow able to multiply the densities there. It's usually a very easy thing because usually, typically there will be Gaussian times Gaussians or things like that. You can actually very easily get the new look of the density, but still you have to do that. It's not always straightforward. Okay? But if you can do that, then there's no problem, and actually keep something is used extensively even in AI settings. I think I'm done with give something, yes. But I wanted to say something. Something you have to take into account is scalability. If you think about scalability, I said that understanding scalability in the sense that if I have more resources, then I can use the same procedure and take advantage of these new resources. For instance, I have more computing units, so can I easily take advantage of them to do things faster or with more data, things like that. Exact algorithms are not necessarily scale up easily. But important sampling scales up very easily. It's very easy because you can distribute the sampling procedure, and as the samples are independent, there is naturally, at least in a naive way, it can be scaled up very easily. When you are thinking about if something, then the fact that the samples depend on each other makes that the scalability, at least this naive scalability, is more difficult. But you could still think about some ways of scaling up. There are papers about that actually. But it's not so straightforward as this with important sampling. There are other Markov chain Monte Carlo approaches given to keep sampling, for instance, what is called the Metropolis Hastings algorithm, in which you actually use some drift to speed it up. But the problem is that some of the samples that you generate will have to be discarded. So you generate very easily a new element in the sample, but after generating it, you check some acceptance condition, and if that is not good, then you have to discard it. But I will not get into details about that, just to let you know that there are 6. And yes, we are heading to the end of the lecture. Luckily for you, and yeah, I mean, it was a coffee break, and I noticed that when Harry said, oh no, it was you said that, no, I think it was you that said, and after this talk there will be a coffee break. Then everybody started to laugh. I don't know if it was because it was the end of the presentation or because of the coffee break. And so same here. I think you'll be. I'm looking forward. I really wanted to have a coffee because I only took water from the coffee break. Mistakenly, I don't know why. Yeah, well, I know why. Because if I take coffee, then I will pour it on me. So I learned that I shouldn't take coffee while I'm lecturing. So water is not so dangerous. So you can pour it, and in half an hour, really away. Yes, actually I did it too, and this has gone away. So we can regard inference as deterministic from a deterministic point of view. And actually, what I will very briefly describe is consider it as an optimization problem. You might say, well, optimization can be also stochastic. Yes, you're right. But actually, there are stochastic ways of carrying out this optimization. But in principle, I will formulate it as if it was purely deterministic. The idea is that we want to approximate the posterior distribution. You might have noted that I have slightly changed notation here. It's because the slides that I have stored in here use this notation, so I decided to change it on the way. No, I mean, let's say that we, Helge, Thomas, and I, we share slides, and that's no. I mean, this is a standard notation in what I'm going to show to present here. More precisely, variation and inference. So the idea here is to find the distribution among some set of, say, we want to approximate that T of C given X, the posterior distribution of some variable or unobserved variable C given some of observed variables X. And then the approach here is say, okay, I will restrict myself to some particular class of distribution. And my interest is to find what distribution among that class or inside that class is the one that best approximates the posterior distribution. For instance, you can say, I don't care about the shape of P of C given X, but I want the posterior distribution to be represented by a normal density. So I have a screwdriver, so all my problems are screwdriver. That could be something like this, but not necessarily. I can represent efficiently Gaussian distribution, so I want to find an approximation that can be formulated instead of Gaussian densities. No? That's what approximation is about. That's what the mathematical theory of approximation is about. So what we do here is to find we need some optimizing criterion, and based on that, then we try to find the distribution within that class that best approximates. That best approximates the exact posterior distribution. That's what I put in the last line. So we are trying to optimize that optimality criteria. Actually, that would be a functional, so a function whose argument that functions as well. And the key thing here now tends to be what is delta, what delta do we choose. Then a typical choice, because it has good and good analytical properties, is to opt for Kruger-Gleiser divergence that can be formulated, that is formulated as it is written on the slide. So the Kullback-Leibler divergence between two, in this case I consider discrete, continuous variable, but it can be expressed for discrete variables as well. Is actually the expected value of the logarithm of the ratio between both distributions. But notice that in the way it is formulated, it is not symmetric. So that's why it's appropriate to call it divergence instead of Kullback-Leibler distance. So, but who to blame if someone says Kullback-Leibler distance? Sometimes I have said that if I am careless. So, but the important thing is that it is not symmetric. So, what we obtain if we are, let's say, trying to find F is our target density and G, let's say, is the one we are looking for. So if we put G first, then we get a different result than if we put F first. And that's what I'm illustrating, actually, what Helge, because I copied this slide from Helge's presentation on some other occasion, because it's very good. So if there's someone is to blame, it's him. And you have the two choices. So if you put, the Q is what we are looking for, and P is the exact one. So if we put the Q first, then what we find is that the Kullback-Leibler divergence is equal to this thing here, where H is the entropy, or H in general of F or Q or P or whatever, is just this minus expected value here, okay? And so, taking that into account, look that this is given preference to high probability areas according to P, and a very small probability given to any region that P is small. So, high entropy means large. Right? I will show a plot trying to explain this later. While if we choose the other alternative, then that this expression here is now computed with respect to P instead of Q. P is the exact one, while this is expected with respect to Q, that is the approximation. So here, what we are doing is to give high probability allocated to regions that are more probable according to P. That's because of the entropy here. And non-zero probability given to any region P that is non-negative. So does it really have an impact on the estimation process or in the optimization process? Yes, it has. Actually, if we find, well, this is usually called the information projection, the one on the left panel of the slide, and the moment projection, the one in the second part, the right panel. So, if we illustrate with this example, which is approximating a mixture of Gaussian, which is the blue line, and then we use the moment projection marked in red and the information projection in blue, in green. So what we find is that the information projection, this one here, the green one, which is actually the information projection, is focusing on the highest peak of the mixture of Gaussian, while the other one, the moment projection, is somehow expanding the variance of the estimate. So it's a Gaussian with a higher variance because it's trying to cover the whole domain of the exact distribution. So I would make a question here, ask a question here. If I ask you, assume we are using Kullback-Leibler divergence to choose a P star for important sampling. Which one would you use? The moments, the red one? Yes, I had moments. Yes, I would say that I would choose the moment projection as well because it has a lower tendency to give zero values or almost zero values. With almost zero values in sampling distribution. However, it's not necessarily the best choice if we are not thinking about important sampling. Actually, what is used in the variational inference, that's just the other approach. So we put the cube on the first part, and then we are following the information projection. And variational inference is exactly about that, finding what is the cube that best approximates P instead of curvature linear divergence, taking into account that Q is within some predefined class of densities, say Gaussian or whatever. So graphically, what variational inference tries to do is to project our exact density onto the space of say, available distribution or the class of distribution that we are considering. And then try to find what is the point within all this whole set that minimizes the curvature linear divergence. So, yes, only 2 minutes, but it is enough. I think I will skip this because it will be shown in tomorrow's lecture and also in the tutorial. But I just wanted to say that something quite important happens again. And, well, it is. Well, this is some tensor pushing that we can do to formulate the curvature library in a different way, so that minimizing the curvature libraries is equivalent to maximizing this quantity here. But the interesting thing of this quantity is that we avoid using the conditional, because we don't know the conditional, the exact conditional distribution, but we can easily evaluate the joint, or more easily evaluate the joint. So that's a key point in variational inference, as it was in some point in important sampling as well. We could evaluate the joint, but not the condition. Here we have something similar. And you will see later how it works, so I think I'm ending. Just to conclude, I would say that PGNs provide a reasonably well-founded way of handling uncertainty. Actually, probability has been used for modeling uncertainty over centuries. And from a Bayesian point of view, inference and learning are connected tasks. The scalability, as I said before, is on the focus, and you will see in the tutorials and in the talk tomorrow that variational inference is a very good alternative. But also, important sampling could be, at least in a straightforward way, preferable to Monte Carlo, because it can be parallelized in an easier way. And finally, I would say that interpretability is a key issue. And I would like to, yes, I'm going ahead of time, but I would like to say that that's a very important example. And I don't know if you know, I don't know if it's true or it's just a, let's say, a myth or a urban legend, but the first time that on an American TV the weather forecast was broadcasted, let's say the 50s or whatever, then the weather person said the probability of that tomorrow will rain in California is 70%. I don't know, people said that. Then people started to form, saying, what do you mean? Is it going to rain in 70% of the territory of California? Or is it going to rain during 70% of the day? And then in the TV station they found that they had a problem because they could be sued. Because people could feel disappointed if they went out and it was raining when they expected that it would be sunny or the other way around. So they found they had a problem. They decided to do something wise. Then they decided to say to whoever calls, okay, we have 10 weather person. Out of them, 7 said it was going to rain, and the other 3 said it wasn't going to rain. So what did they want to have? They want to that the message was sent in a very precise way. And it doesn't matter what method we choose here. When we are speaking about humans, if we don't say it very clearly, then the humans will interpret that in their own way. So when we speak about probability, then we have to be very precise about what do we mean by probability. And that's a good thing, because we can always say, by probability, I'm meaning this. In the previous station, they adopted that way of explaining the meaning of probability. We can just say, by probability, I mean any function that is fulfilling the Kolmogorov axioms. That's fairly perfect. You could also adopt a betting scheme. That's the maximum bet that I'm able to put in exchange of receiving €1 if this turns out to happen, blah, 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 blah. But that's something that you are still in the beginning of your career, most of you, and then when we start to speak with, for instance, with industry people, then you will find out that it's quite important to speak the same language. And that, when we speak about probability, then this is very important that we do so, because we could make very efficient algorithms, very efficient learning inference algorithms, but then when you apply, the user is getting a wrong message. And that's all. Thank you very much. Let's go for the process.